Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Levesque, and I'm the Executive Director of Inclusive Theater of Western New York. And this week, we are excited to have Julio Montalvo Valentin, who is a poet. He is the author of trap books, Those Who Pray to Rice, Don't Give Up the Ship, and Ship Lost. And he has a whole plethora of places where he has been published and anthologized, and super, super great guy on top of all of the poetry, even though he drives me nuts. I'm kidding. You're all right, dude. And he is currently getting his master's degree in English literature at Buffalo State College, which is how we met because I teach there and we work together. So thank you very much for being here. This is week 11 of our series on inclusion in the arts. And this week we had a week off, and this week we're kind of regrouping, and we're going to be talking still about this inclusion, but also the importance of social justice in the work that we do and will continue to do. So without further ado, welcome Julio. Thank you Dallas Taylor, who is the Artistic Director of Inclusive Theater. Chris, and Janelle's in there somewhere. Chris is a board member for Inclusive, and Jessica and Queen, who are both actors at Inclusive Theater of Western New York. So without further ado, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Like Amy said, thank you, Julio, for joining us tonight and taking some time to talk with us a little bit. So even though it seems that one disease has sort of been knocked off by another in today's world, how have you been handling your quarantine?
Well, I don't know if I can ever say that I've gotten a handle of any of it at all. I mean, because it's an everyday thing, and it's something that I don't think is going to be disappearing anytime soon. But if I was to imagine that I'm handling it, I think it's through the fact that I sort of vent through my writing, that I try to make a practice of like using the arts to at least relieve some of that pressure that that I know that all of us are feeling right now.
And I did a little bit of extra research before coming on. In your Instagram bio, you say that you're a philosopher of rice. What exactly is that? What is your philosophy?
So before, I think this requires just a little bit of backstepping. I love rice. I grew up on it, obviously, as a Puerto Rican. It's a staple of almost every single day. But what I mean by like the philosophy of rice, what came out of that term, is the fact that if you look all over the world, anyone who goes hungry, anyone who is in a third world country, whatever that means these days, since I feel like everyone is just feeling the reels of reality, whether it's hungry or money or something. But rice in particular can be found all over the world, and it's usually the one thing everyone uses. They don't pray to God, or they don't rely on money, but it's a bowl of rice somehow that they can rely on a daily basis to sustain them. That somehow it is rice, which is weirdly and historically speaking, like the means of controlling the masses, but it's also a liberator for those who are trying to get through the day. And so I feel like a philosopher of rice because I'm so interested in how rice has been one of the things for me personally that I've been able to get, not just through the day, but even through my writing. Somehow I return to rice because of this level of gratitude that I have for not just that, but the person who makes the rice. My mother, who taught me patience through rice. My grandmother, who taught me that love means sharing a bowl with another person through rice. So when I say philosopher of rice. I mean a philosopher of someone who wants to sit down at the table, talk with you, share love with you, and just hope that you carry that bowl with you somewhere else.
So that rice is sort of a bigger symbol for something else.
Yes. Yes.
So you are a writer and you have a couple of chapbooks, a lot of poetry in your history. What was your journey coming up in the poetry community? Like, how did you sort of make your way up to that? Did you go to a lot of open mics, or was it just a lot of writing? What was that journey like for you?
I was a former CNA and home health aide. I took care of one of my best friend's mother for several years, and the entire time I didn't think about writing. I just wanted to share the experience of living in the moment with another human being, and it just so happened I got lucky with so many amazing people that I just so happened to have as patients. And this last patient, this really close family, pretty much, she had passed away, and when she passed away, I didn't know how to communicate that whatsoever. I knew that she was living vicariously through me, through my stories of what's happening outside, talking about politics, and just trying to share a mind with one another, someone who wasn't able to step outside. And I went to class. It was my first semester in ECC and at Erie County Community College. And I, after the funeral, I go to class and the teacher asked me, like, what's wrong? I'm in a daze. And I just said, I lost someone. I don't even know the words for it anymore. And uh, the other words is like, we had a iffy, a weird love and hate relationship. And I just said, I don't know what to hate anymore, because we used to bicker at each other for the dumbest things, and it meant so much for us to have this weird language of love between each other. How she used to be mad that I couldn't heat up her cup of coffee beyond the boiling point because she loves her coffee lava hot. So when I lost her, and I tried to learn what it means to say I miss you, I cried. And then after that class, my professor told me, just write it out. Just write it out, and don't stop until that is out of you. And even when it's not, write tomorrow and the day after. And it's so weird that after all these years, I'm still writing out the hurt, and I still think about her every single day. And when you ask me, like, how am I handling it, everyone is like waking up to a world of hurt, so we have to pour it out. And I just got stuck in writing poetry because of that reason, because it seems like a necessity for me to be able to comprehend anything in this world if it wasn't with poetry to kind of alleviate that.
And so when you have that going on, and then everything else in the surrounding world now just adding more weight on top of that for everybody now, it seems, where does your creative mind go?
My instinct is to say it goes to the rice. Ironically, sometimes I just need a really good meal, a good plate of food, and then I just sit back and just think, what is the flower saying to me? Like, what is the world trying to say to me, and what can I say back? Is there even anything to say at all? And then I just imagine, in a weird utopian kind of way, just imagine what the words tomorrow is going to be. And then sometimes those words are the ones that I don't want to hear. Sometimes I'll write a poem about um, a hurt that I've experienced in the past, and I feel that it's coming again. I mean, I guess we're all trying to like cruise through this thing, and poetry seems to be the one thing to help me cruise through the day. But I want to preface that I did start through that process, but it was only until like maybe 2, 3 years ago that I realized that not only was it a necessity, it was a sense of being able to find out who I am in this space. Not just on the words on the page, but like here, just being able to communicate how I feel, what I'm thinking, actually develop a voice is something now more than ever that we need to be mindful of. That some of the things that we write about don't have the ability to speak up for themselves. And whether it's because they're being oppressed or because they don't have the ability to speak or to communicate or in a means that someone else can understand, we in the arts tend to channel that feeling or that thought or that meaning and try to convey it. And as a poet, I try to give voice to the things I talk about. I I tried to relay that as someone who is the caretaker, my my the person I love the most in this world, my mother, who happens to be deaf, and I speak up for her when people don't pay attention to her or when they don't hear her words, even when she signs or tries to vocalize it. And I didn't realize that that goes hand in hand with poetry, with the arts, how we try to communicate things that we feel in our bodies to others. It's when I sit down and I get ready to write a poem, I think about what the world tells me. I think about what my mom wants to say back to, and that's usually how it starts.
You sort of preface this with that answer, especially now, how important is the role of the artist to sort of not just give people a voice that other people aren't hearing, but to help amplify those voices? How important is our role nowadays?
I it's an that's I want to say that the role of the artist um, is one that should have an expiration date. That the the artist, or at least in this case, the poet, has always been seen through like according to the Republic of Plato's Republic, the notion that the artist or the poet is like the dangerous thing in society. Um, it's because poets can think outside of the realm of systems. So today we think about systems that were never built to include people like me or you or anyone that doesn't fall in line with its agenda. Case in point, we're thinking about um, the police issue that we're having right now. The fact that some people are disproportionately treated worse than others, and how do we speak against those things? How do we even speak up to those things? And one of the ways that I've been able to process that is through writing, through poetry, even if it's not for a macro level of change, at least starting with a micro level of change in me. And then hoping that micro change when someone reads that poem will also feel the same, that somehow that the hurt that I'm feeling through this, that you also are feeling it too, that hopefully we can get to a point where we can change these things so no one's hurting anymore. So I think the role of the artist should have an expiration point, because quite frankly, if the artist is still around, that means that there's something that the system is denying us, that something in the world is telling us that we need to speak up. So as long as I'm here, as long as there's problems or things that are unable to convey themselves, and people that have a need to speak up, I'll be around. Artists will be around. Poets will be around to continue to try to convey that message. And hopefully, we won't need us to speak up anymore. At least the poets.
Chris and Janelle, you guys had a question you can jump in.
I did, yeah. Well, a couple things to say. Hang on, I'm just trying to close the chat window because it's blocking my screen a little bit. There we go. First of all, I went and I looked up some of your work online when I found out that you were going to be with us, Julio, and literally the first thing that I saw, which was prophetic, goes back to 2017, and it was just a short couple lines that is called "The Social Suicide."
Oh.
And it says, when dictators tactfully inform the ignorant masses to self-destruct by using, and then it's hashtag hate speech. And that says so much about where we are now, although not tactfully necessarily. But you actually, I had a lot I was thinking of, but you hit on a lot of it already. Like a lot of the work that I've focused on. I'm a United Methodist pastor, and whatever people believe or don't believe about faith, I think barriers are broken down by relationships. And so often, to your Rice thinking, so often that fellowship is built around a table, around a shared meal, around this is where we find commonality. And it's a interesting, difficult time, because not only are we dealing with the racism, which is also or always rather been sort of pervasive, except for now it's amplified more, just because it's being encouraged to be amplified, which is making it seem worse, even though it's always been there, I think. Although obviously, as a middle-aged white guy, I have privilege that I can roll on and not notice it as much, or not pay attention to it as much, I guess, is what I would say. Except that those relationships that I've built with people of color who I love don't allow me to roll on by and not call out. It's what took me from being not racist to being anti-racist. And I think that that's something. But now that, and of course people are protesting and things, but for somebody like me who's high risk, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that's where I was kind of going with all this. Like, not only are we dealing with the racism that's so pervasive, but we're also in the middle of a pandemic, which again, to the isolation, to the, how are you dealing with this? But how do you think we build community, build more relationships in a world where we might not necessarily be able to be across the table from each other? We are, in a way of speaking, I'm at my table and you're where you are, but how do we amplify that so that we can continue to break down these barriers for others, whether they're race or ability or gender or orientation or any other things, no matter the bodies in which we live? Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, actually, before I share, I just want to apologize. A neighbor a couple of houses down is having a barbecue, so forgive me for being outside. Their music might silence me in some kind of weird way. So if you can't hear me, just let me know. But I want to start off with the reference of the social suicide. I didn't think that in 2020 the world would. I don't think anyone expected this. But I did sense a danger in the way in which hate speech has become somehow like the avenue of like breaking down inclusion entirely. Um, the fact that it, in its weird way, gives voice, the same way we are trying to find and promote voice, it finds a voice that argues back and actually tries to silence those other voices. So when we talk about like how can we build community in these things, and you pointed out one of the most excellent ways we can is utilizing the tools that we have today. Technology like this didn't exist like 20 years ago in my mind. Like, even growing up on dial-up, I never would have thought being able to communicate to more than one other human being, or nonetheless share this experiences with everybody else. So being able to metaphorically have a seat at the table here with all of you is one start. Another way that I envision it is that building community requires empathy. It requires a sense of duty to take care of one another. And so finding each other, constantly searching, not giving up on seeing that we're all trying to do something. At least collectively, we feel that there's something that needs to be done, and in finding the avenues in which we can make some changes. I would like to reference like some amazing people that I know in this community in Buffalo that is trying to do stuff. First person I want to even mention is Bianca L. McCraw, who is also a poet, who also specialized in inclusion, someone who has been on point about not only diversity, but making changes and forcing us to think about inclusion on a daily basis.
She does a lot with Pure Ink, right?
Yes. I don't think I'm not sure if she's still a part of that group, but she is now. She hosts open mics. She works with so many of us. I can't tell you how many times she has been the community to me, because she has been so outgoing and trying to connect so many of us poets who happen to be a marginalized voice or differently abled or some sort. Another group that I would say that has been like really forthcoming in terms of the arts is the Los Artistas de Barrio, which is a group of Latinx collective artists who are like trying to find a means of communicating with the community via the arts. And they have all types of artists in that group. Used to be a part of it myself. So it's not so much as like thinking about like what can we do to build community. We just have to find that community, because there's so many of us here in Buffalo, and sometimes I used to think myself that I'm so alone in my own experience, and you don't realize that there's so many other people who are experiencing the same feelings of being isolated or alone or somehow seen as different, especially in this world right now, with the way COVID-19 has been, the way that the police brutality has been, not only has always been there, just being recorded and seen on a more frequent basis. And finally, I think in that statement, we just have to find and be able and be willing to reach out and find those other individuals, because I know I always am happy to hear from any stranger or anybody on the road whenever I'm on a poetry tour. Whenever they ask me like, "Oh, you're Julio, you're the rice poet. I love rice too," and then I get to share my message about that, and then somehow I have another follower, and it's not a cult or anything like that, but building community just means expressing yourself and realizing that there are more people like you out there. And by doing that, the problems that we as individuals face not only can be changed on a micro level, but can be changed on a macro level too.
Thanks. There's a lot there to unpack. I appreciate a lot of what you said. I'm a little bit of a poet myself, and so I appreciate your work. I just thought it was so interesting that that was the first thing that I pulled up and prophetic. But thank you.
No, thank you. You shocked me too, because I write on a daily basis at least an hour a day, and most of it just is for myself, just to understand what's going on in the world, understand myself in the world. But then some pieces, like I didn't realize already came out, and sometimes you just get shocked when you hear a poem that you hoped wasn't to be the case. I think I mentioned it earlier that sometimes you write for the future, and sometimes that future isn't so bright. And that was one of those poems. And the start of this administration, we at least some of us realize that we're going in a slippery slope, and when voices start getting silenced, when voices scream over other voices, that's an alarm for me as a poet, wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I really appreciate that because certainly I felt a lot of exactly what you're talking about. So again, to know that you're not alone, and that's something. So my hope is that we continue to find ways. Yes, we have this, but how do we bring like one more person in, and then one more person in? And sometimes it's slow. It's one person at a time. That's really, and you can only do the work or meet the people that are in front of you. But hopefully, if we keep breaking down those barriers, that we'll get there. But we'll get there together.
And if anyone else had any questions, you can just jump right in. How do we go about really, like you mentioned, finding those communities? Like we have speaking up, right? Like because we're all different in some way, and we can't really show ourselves unless we don't say anything. That's how a lot of these movements start and get going, by you announcing yourself that you exist and that you will not be silenced anymore. But how else would you go about finding these communities and bringing us together?
Outside of like seeing the ones that are already established, I inversely think that the responsibility of finding a community is not on us as individuals entirely. That those communities that are already building should also be seeking for us. How can like one planet communicate to another planet without both of them looking at the same time at each other? And so in that statement, I believe that the hosts or the leaders in our community, which by the way I believe are doing a fabulous job trying to reach out to the masses. The ones I'm speaking of is Black Love Resist in the Rust, Push Buffalo, the WNY Peace Center. These spaces, these institutions, these nonprofits, these groups, they're seeking people like us, people who want change or want to contribute, to go beyond the research, go beyond the word, and actually do a part of community activism. Even poetry readings. I co-hosted a reading series called Ground and Sky, and the point was to do a call and response to however we are feeling in that room, and that slowly build into a huge community of writers, of people who just love the art of poetry. And then it stemmed into talking about the things that we needed to do in the community, and somehow some ideas would spout out of this thing and start causing little changes here and there. So when you mention like finding it, yes, it is up to us to like do the work to look for these things. But if we do just enough, those communities are looking back, also trying to find us too. And I think in situations like this, uh, the pandemic, whichever pandemic you're looking at, um, people will rise up. People find a reason to stand with other people to cause change, whether it's good or bad. And in that spirit, I think you just have to just be willing and open, for when that opportunity comes.
I want to go back to writing for a little bit. So I think, what's the question here? Was it hard for you to find your own voice in your writing? Because I feel like a lot of times for me, we're as poets, as writers, we read a lot. So then we start to write. We're like, is this me, or is this Ernest Hemingway talking, or is this someone else talking? Like, how did you find your voice, or was it easy for you to find your voice in your writing?
It was never easy finding my voice. Even today, like thinking, do I really have my voice? I want to imagine that I do, but at least if I imagine it and speak up enough, then maybe I do have a voice. But in terms of the arts, in terms of writing, I was always curious about how to communicate. Um, English is my third language. My first one is ASL. I learned home sign and then ASL with my mom. Our home um, my dad in particular made it a priority that once you're born in this household, you have to learn how to speak the language of your mother before you learn to speak a language of me. And then the second one, Spanish. And in my experience of learning that, how to operate in language in weird ways, and then coming to English, um, writing it was just so hard until I got to high school, where my English teacher kind of exposed me to the idea that maybe the way that you're writing isn't wrong. It's just not fitting in what we call English. You're writing it, you're communicating it. Maybe it's not even a structure that people can understand because it sounds like poetry. What people are calling weird structure in your vocabulary, the way you're writing it, it's not wrong. It's imaginatory. It's you can see the imagery. So I took that lesson, and after a while I had forgot about it. So going through the everyday of you have to work, you have to live your life, and somehow the art disappeared, but also me as a human being seemed to dull a bit too, until I got here, until my friend, my dear old friend, Ada, who passed away, when she used to write her name all the time and like just do these little diddles and like try to write these sweet memories onto the page, realizing that my mom who grew up in Puerto Rico, was never able to write because they treated um, people like her as indentured servants, that they would just put you in the church and then all you had to do was clean and cook. You didn't need to know how to read or write or communicate at all. And I see her today, to this very day. She had learned how to write our names, just my siblings' names, and how to write heart and I love you, and I miss you. I think about that and I realize that my ability to write on the page may be finite because I have all this access to language. But I think about how do I include myself in the process of that, and how do I make that process easier. I just simply have to care. And sometimes that's all it takes. If I care about it, who cares who's reading this right now? I need to say this. I have to get it out of me because it's going to just build up. Because for those people in my life who haven't been able to say those things that they've been wanting to write out of their hands, who am I to deny myself the ability to speak on the page? Who am I to be my own critic? It doesn't, my poems are not meant for anyone but for me to write out of, so yeah, when I think about it like that, I don't even need to think about a process to start writing it. I just gotta give myself permission to write and be okay with what comes out of that, whatever it is. And at least I know that it's not an opportunity wasted, So one example of that is that I have a ton of friends who know that I always walk around with a book, with a pen, because in case that I get some idea, I need to write it right away. If I got some thought that's communicating with what you're saying or doing, I need to get it out of me now because I don't want to wait and then it disappears. So yeah, you could always find me in an open mic reading or like in a public space, just constantly writing my thoughts down because the human mind is not that reliable. Paper sometimes is though. Yeah.
That's a good point. What was that feeling like when you found that freedom that I don't need anyone's validation for this? I'm putting this out there because this is me putting it out there. It's not for anyone else but for me. What was that feeling like when that hit you?
Freedom. I think people think like all of a sudden that there are things that'll give you a great sense of freedom, like a enormous wealth or access to certain things. But when you feel unchained in your voice, when you feel unchained in your mind to communicate or to just allow yourself to freely say and just be able to think these things out, I think that moment when I realized that, oh, wait a minute, I am communicating myself. I can see me in these words. That felt gratifying. It felt validating, and it felt like healing. I think some of us like want to see ourselves in others, and I think the easiest way we do that is through our own writing, being able to see ourselves. And that's the thing that I love feeling when I write it. When I hear something and I think about writing it down, and I got the poem out, even if it's just a rough draft, I'm like, oh, I see this. I got that out of my head, and I see it right here in front of me. It feels like alchemy, but I like to call it freedom, that it's out of me. It's alive. It's living on its own now. Yeah.
That's the power of the arts, though, right? Is that, and I'm a little bit of a liberation, actually a lot of a liberation theologian. So like you're really speaking my language here, and whatever systems, and religion is one of them, that people co-opt sometimes in order to kind of keep people in check or in place, or to silence them. When you're able to put words on a page or get your experience out there like that, you said it already, it's freedom. It's something that can't be restrained. This is my voice. And so even for somebody like me who is in a wheelchair, and I lament sometimes, and I that I can't get on a lot of the stages. So it's hard for me to go and be part of things if I get up in front of people, you know, other than if I'm on the floor and then people say, oh, well, I can't see you or whatever, but it's kind of inequitable. But I can still put the words out there, you know, that's still my platform is for me. Like, I may not be able to get into the building, but my words still have life. And you're right, that's exactly my experience too. Like, just you got to get them out. And a lot of times I find myself texting myself, like I text my own phone number in the middle of the night instead of having paper and a pen, because my eyes aren't so good and I don't want to turn the lights on anyway. But, you know, texting myself in the middle of the night and then hoping they hold up to in the light of day, you know, my words. But it's an interesting experience. But I really think, and that was the point, my long-winded way of saying it, is that that's the power, right, of the words, of putting the paper to the pen. And that even when 2016 hit and we felt a lot of what you've already talked about, and certainly what I felt, and for those of us who are white people who want to be allies and help you know, bring other people's voices to the floor, standing up for racial justice, Surge is another good group that works with some of the organizations, some of the groups you already mentioned, Julio. But when that happened, when 2016 hit and we said, what are we going to do? It sort of becomes, I can still do this. Like, even if I can't, even in the pandemic, like I can't get out, but I can still write my words down, and that's still my platform. And you can't stop that.
Yeah, like if we didn't feel that way, I would think that we wouldn't see protests with signs, with language of any sort, even if it was just an image. We won't see these things up. The power of ads today, the way that we're right now, we could see each other's names. I think the point that language in itself, while it can restrain a lot of us, it is also the platform in which we can communicate and feel liberated through too. And I mean, if there's anything we can do, just wanting to write signs, just getting signs together, promoting for some sort of change is enough. That you don't even have to be a poet to do that. You just have to have the empathy and the will to want change. And that is enough. I think some people have brought it to themselves to think that somehow they have to change everything by, you know, getting out there. And I think that is one way of looking at it. But I think another way is that it doesn't include all of us that also feel the same way. I myself am unable to partake in protests because I'm immune compromised too. As a diabetic, as someone who had three stress-induced heart attacks, and someone who is near my mom and near my good little buddy who I take care of, Aiden, I don't want to get them sick. So how do I advocate? Well, one, I can promote space, continue doing what I'm doing, that I've been doing prior to all this, trying to keep the voices that need to be heard out there, people who need to be heard generally every day, people who look like me, people who don't look like me, people who can do the things that I'm unable to do. Because if we're talking about being inclusive, it's not about being diverse in your voice, it's talking about being proactive in change and actually enacting those things. So for me, it's writing. It's the one thing I've been able to do, and constantly remind people the things that they are not paying attention to. Some of the other poems that you probably came across in that search was one of talking about the way that politics have made us look at other people on the other side of the ocean as somehow different than us, that their experiences weren't going to be here. And look at here, we have protests. Here we have military that is like trying to gear up. We have a police force that is trying to oppress its own voice down. I mean, I can talk for hours about the way that these systems really weren't made for us. They were made to keep us oppressed. And we just so happen to be in the age where we can sort of hold the policemen accountable with evidence according to the law. But you see that people are still out here protesting, using their language. They recite songs, hymns. They're trying to make change with their language. And if you're not a poet, if you're out there and you're protesting, you sure are one. You sure are one, because you are trying to make change outside of a system that you recognize is broken, and it doesn't include you.
Wow, thanks.
And just going off of that, I was just watching everything and just baffled by the cries of Black people calling for equality from police force, and their response is, okay, we're not going to treat you any better. We're just going to treat white people worse. Right? We're going to shoot white people in the face with rubber bullets now. And that was just it just hit me a different way. But just going off of that, we all, with the advent or advancement of technology and with social media now, and even with the protesters, everyone has a platform now, whether good or bad, how you use that platform, but everyone has a platform. Like even in our own social lives, with our own social circles, maybe it's a platform of one, a platform of 50 or 50 million, whatever, but we all have a platform, and it's important that we use it, and that's going to help bring about this change that we want. So with that said, this is probably an impossible question, so I'll pretty much open this up to the group. Where do you think we're going to be in 6 months?
Probably still in our homes, probably thinking the same thing. What's going to happen 6 months from now? I mean, I don't want to sound like pessimist, but I've never seen change happen so fast. Like kind of like the way that we live our lives. We don't realize that we're old until we're old, or we don't realize the childhood that we had is gone. Change is inevitable, hopefully, for many things. But when it comes to where we are 6 months from now, I hope we have a little bit more to be hopeful for. Do I think that we'll see some justice? I think so. I want to believe in the good of us, that something, if enough of us is speaking out, if we endure, which we shouldn't have to, if we push, well, we shouldn't have to. Think if we hold on and we don't give up on our ideas of what it means to be not just decent human beings but inclusive to each other, then I think we stand a chance for something hopeful in 6 months. Hell, I write in a sense that I will be able to have a nice snack tonight, and hopefully tomorrow my diabetic numbers is going to be just fine. It's the small things. Instead of thinking about 6 months from now, thinking about tomorrow is enough. We put too much. If anything, this pandemic has shown us, capitalism has a weird way of like putting a lot of pressure on you to think a lot in the future. The future is something we don't have any control of except tomorrow, what we can do tomorrow. That is guaranteed to you. So I would say that I think tomorrow another poem is coming. I think a change that I hope to learn from is coming. Before what we saw happened in Minneapolis. I didn't think anyone would care if someone did that to me. And I've been in that position. Oh, I've been in that position for a couple of minutes over Pokemon cards that a cop thought I stole from a store. This is in the Bronx. I think about the first time I got a gun pulled on me by a cop, thinking that, oh, this is going to be the last time. And then I came to Buffalo, and it damn near happens like almost like clockwork 2-3 months at a time. I even had a cop pull me over because I was singing the Moana song with my niece in the background, and he thought I was shouting and being belligerent. Pulled me over, and I was scared for the life of me. I've lost friends because I'm constantly thinking of the what ifs of today, about like, what if I get pulled over in this car? What if I walk down the wrong street? And I have enough of those experiences as it is. It would warrant one like me to be like just tired about it all, but it makes me still want to hope that tomorrow could be better. That I hope that another day of us standing out here, or those who are trying to protect one another by staying indoors and being cautious, that somehow we're going to cause change of tomorrow. And so, yeah, I hope even 6 months from now that things will get a little better. Oh, and I'll have a bowl of rice, a really good bowl of rice. So.
I want to jump in because you're really speaking my language, and there's your words. There's so much there that, again, we could go on for days with so much of this conversation. And you know, when I think about, well, a couple things you said. First of all, like, you'll wake up and be old, like that happened. You know, I woke up and I'm like, when did I turn into my dad? You know, I'm 52, and you know, it's a strange thing, but you know, for a long time, I would lament. I would think, like, I'm really inspired by the work of Martin Luther King Jr. And like, that was a catalyst for me theologically to go in the direction that I went in, being a minister and things like that. And I would think, you know, 10 years before my age, more than that now, you know, he was dead, and look how much he did, and all that. And what have I done? You know, and I would think that a lot. But the truth is that the only person I can really control is me. And another thing to that is, you do the work, and you build the relationships with the people right in front of you. Even Martin Luther King didn't set out to be Martin Luther King. He was just a minister who went to a little town thinking he was going to finish his scholastic work and everything, and then life happened around him and he rose to it. But you know, at the end of the day, I had this conversation with somebody once before, and I would say, you know, there's so much of life that can be a grind, and even so much of ministry, in my case, that can be a grind. And I would say, you know, I want to do more. I want to do more. And somebody said to me, well, why did you get into this to begin with? And I said, I wanted to help people. And she said to me, well, have you helped anybody? And I said, yeah, of course. And she said, then you've done what you came to do. And no matter what happens in the world around me, and some days I'm hopeful and other days not as much, you know, I know that I can get on with you folks or somebody else that's right in front of me, or I can write some words, or I can do any number of things that make a difference today, just right where I am. And that, to me, is where the hope is.
Yeah, I mean, if we're thinking about how we can do something, if if protests are the language of the unheard, then that would make the arts an advocate. We may not be at the protests, but through the arts we can help, we can support, and we can be an ally to these protests, to the message, to the meaning of why we need change. And it's because we're, especially in the arts, you can't be complicit, you can't be lazy with the arts. You got to be able to push yourself, you got to be willing to put the work in, because Lord knows that there are many of us that need that support, many of us.
Another thing I would add to what you said is that I think it can be arts can be the protest because it's subversive. Like just putting, black bodies on the stage, people of color on the stage, or cripples like me on the stage, in a wheelchair, and saying, this is how you imagine it, but here's how we imagine it. That's revolutionary in itself. Mm-hmm. And again, it's sort of subversive work. It may not seem like a protest on the surface, but actually that's sort of a good thing, because it can kind of work in this undercurrent sort of way and change perspectives, just by being exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's a Trojan horse, if you will.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit.
And in that Trojan horse, there's definitely a heart just made out of riot, just angry and needs to be heard, for sure. Yeah.
So with that, if there's anything else that anyone else wanted to jump in and ask or say anything, or if Julio had any closing thoughts before we close this thing out. I think it's been a very, very inspirational conversation that hopefully people can get a hold of and watch in the future, and definitely just take something from this. So if anyone else had any final thoughts before we close this one out.
All I have to say is thank you for the opportunity, thank you for the space, but most importantly, thank you for the poem that comes after this.
Oh, that just gave me chills.
We look forward to reading it.
Yes.
You got an amen from my corner.
I promise you, I'll have that poem ready tomorrow. I'll share it for sure.
Well, and I think it's been awesome that you're here. I appreciate it very much. I am lucky enough, I know you, I work with you, so I know all of these other kind of things that a lot of the world doesn't know yet. But I say yet because I think that your voice is important. The words you write are beautiful, and they're filled with purpose, and we need more of that. So thank you for sharing that with us, and for just sharing this time so that voices are heard. And that is inclusive's one of our big pieces, that we don't want people telling our stories. We have to be those agents for ourselves, and in doing so it will hopefully influence some change. And if it doesn't, the change might just be something that comes from within, right? I mean, just like you were saying, but it's always that start. And I just want to say also, when you were talking about riots, I thought you said rice, and I was cracking up, because we talk about this all the time at work, because Julio is always talking about rice. One time we did a Zoom meeting and it said, Julio, who loves rice? I'm programmed to expect the rice thing. So, but I love the story about that. You had never really talked about it other than, I love rice. So thank you for also talking about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also, I'm sorry if you got a list of questions beforehand and I didn't ask a single one. So
I didn't give him any questions. I put him on the hot seat.
Trust me, you can throw any question at me. I'll divert it back to rice somehow. I'll find a way.
We had talked a little beforehand too. It was kind of like, well, I want you just to talk, like whatever is on your heart. And he goes, I'll be talking for 5 hours. And I'm like, well, do it. Like whatever you got to do. Because we talk a lot about these things at work too. Julio has had some situations that he's talked to me way before any of the stuff that's happening out in the world was happening. And we've had a lot of conversations about these. And then also one of the things leading up to this conversation tonight was talking about his friend Aiden, who is a young man with autism, and some of the struggles that he's going to have because for not any other reason that he is a brown body. And why is that happening? And there's a lot of issues happening that are not just systemic. It's institutionalized thinking, which is what we always kind of go back to. So these kind of microaggressions are built on this massive thing, this entity. And I'm a firm believer that, things like this and having these conversations open are what at least begins to open that dialogue to change. And that was why Inclusive was conceived. It wasn't simply just to have a whole bunch of people that, although we joke around, right, we're Wu-Tang. There's a whole bunch of people here that are a bunch of misfits, and Dallas is so good when he does that. But it's more than that. It really is more than that. And Quentin just got here too. It's people that are revolutionary in what they do and really do want to make change in our world. So thank you for being part of that. It's exciting for me to hear what you had to say, and so thank you.
Thank you. Again, thank you for having me. I'm always happy to talk and just try to spread not just a little bit of love, but at least hope. Period. It's so easy that our conversations of every day can stir into one that just feels like it's the end, or like there's nothing's gonna happen, nothing's gonna change. But like I mentioned before, like age, things will change. We have to just be persistent about it. As long as we're not complicit to it, it will come. It will come.
Well, thank you, Julio, very much.
Thank you.
We are still working on our guests for next week. We hope you guys will tune in that are here or that are viewing this at a later time. Again, we had a week off, but we're back at it. If you have people that you'd like or have suggestions on people you'd like to see on the show, that's awesome too. But I do want to keep our conversations going, especially now. They were timely before, that's why Inclusive started, but they are more so now. And also because I think really in many of our conversations, we're at the forefront of these conversations, and we should be included going forward. So we have to kind of be preemptive in that. So thank you very, very much, Julio. We're so glad you're here. Hey, Q, how are you? I'm good to see you.
Hey, how you doing? So I'm like, yeah. So I like just got off work.